Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Robert Whitaker with Journeys Through Time. HansfordHeritage.com is our website. This is episode 18 with Grace Lyon, Grace Richardson Lyon. The Richardson family, her family, came to Hansford County from Albany, Texas in a covered wagon in 1902. Grace would have been 3 years old. And they settled on 4 sections south of Old Hansford and had their cow herd there. This episode is an absolute treat when it comes to the history of Hansford County because Grace Lyon wrote the first historical narratives that we all know about in terms of the Buffalo Hunters, the Zulu Stockade, the Cater brothers, the first women that came to Hansford County, she talks about. This is one of the most fantastic episodes in terms of history that I've ever listened to about our county. Grace Lyon was married to P.A. Lyon, who is he's not the founding owner of the Hansford County Abstract Company, but he purchased Hansford County Abstract in 1929 in a land trade. He traded land for the title company, essentially. And she barely talks about that towards the end of this episode. So there's not a whole lot of history there, but there is a ton of history about Old Hansford. And this is done in 1974. So there's a limit of time at the radio station that they have to do this, and my guess is the limit is probably 45 minutes max. Most of these episodes are about 30 minutes, but the beauty of today and the way that we can do podcasting is we can sit for 2 and 3 hours and listen to these folks. She wanted to talk more. She wanted to tell more stories. They ran out of time, and this is the only recording that we have of her. Actually, I think there's a second one, but I'm gonna have to look into that. She wanted to talk more about Powder Creek and what it was like. Things that were very interesting. So, when we start doing interviews live, or not really live, but when we start doing interviews today in 2023 and 2024, I don't want there to be a time limit. I want folks to be able to talk as long or as briefly as they want to get as much of their history recorded as we can. And for the sake of posterity, this is a good practice. Podcasting is way better nowadays than what the time limits of radio constrict us with. So anyway, I'll get off of my soapbox and let you listen to this episode. It's fantastic. You'll enjoy it. Thank you and have a great day.
Hansford County, Texas. I think, Grace, you presented this to a sorority, 20th Century Club. Mm-hmm. And we're going to touch on this plus many other things with Grace. Our sponsor this morning, Dwayne, who is our sponsor? Baker and Taylor Drilling Company. I was so excited in talking to Grace that I forgot to bring our sponsor's name in. And we're in the coffee room, of course. Grace, I hope you won't get chilly. We've got a little progress going out here, and they broke a gas line to the station, and we don't have any heat. Are you all right?
Yes, I'm comfortable.
Fine. And we'll be back in just a moment to visit with Grace Lyon about the many wonderful days that were spent in forming what we now know as Hansford and Spearman and Groover and all the surrounding area. Mm-hmm. But right now, here's a message from Baker and Taylor. Yes, this morning is Grace Lyon. Grace, first of all, let's establish when you came and your maiden name, because you've lived here most of your life so far, since 1902, I believe.
Yes, in May 1902.
And if you'll talk up a little, or can we get you to move a little closer to the microphone?
Yes.
We're taping this for posterity's sake, and we sure want your voice heard. What was your maiden name when you came here?
Grace Richardson.
Grace Richardson. And you were 3 years old when you came.
Yes.
And you said you could remember this very well. Yes. Where did you come from to this country?
We came from Shackelford County and Stevens County. Both counties, they lived in both counties. The ranch was in one county, and we were living in Albany at the time we came.
Now, where is Albany?
It's in Shackelford County.
What town would I know that it's close?
Near Breckenridge.
Breckenridge.
Breckenridge is in Stevens. And,
now, quite a few people came from that area.
Yes.
Tell us about the trip. How did you come?
We came in a covered wagon.
And how long?
Well, we left in June of 1901.
1901?
Mm-hmm. And we came as far as Matador and spent the winter there and wintered the cattle there. Of course, we came right along with a herd of cattle.
How many cattle did you have?
Well, I don't have any. I don't know. I'm sorry that I can't tell you. But we had quite a bunch because we had all of our cattle. It was my father and his brother. They had their mother's ranch cattle. And the O'Laughlins had quite a bunch of cattle, Charlie and John O'Laughlin, and W.M. Lieb. He had his cattle. So I don't know how many there were, but I know it was a large herd.
And you told me that Mr. Lieb came on to Hutchinson
Yes,
County.
he came on that fall. He didn't stay in Matador, but we and the O'Laughlin families stayed.
Tell us something about the trip. Now, in a covered wagon, you didn't have any roads to speak of, did you?
Well, I can't remember about the roads. I know we came right along with the cattle. Of course, it was some shortcuts. But we had a chuck wagon, and we ate with the cowboys.
Quite a few cowboys to drive.
Yes, yes, there was quite a number.
How many wagons did you have in all?
Well, there must have been four wagons.
And quite a few children?
Well, just our children, really, were all. There was four of us. My mother.
You were the youngest one then, I guess.
No, my brother, just younger than I am, was just a baby.
Well, it takes a lot of nerve.
He was born in March.
Takes a lot of nerve to start out like that.
Yes, it was. My mother thought it was quite an ordeal.
That's the pioneering spirit, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And what would you have? I suppose you had a cook along.
Yes, there was a cook, and he drove the chuck wagon, and of course he prepared all the meals, and we all ate.
Supplies. What kind of meals would you have?
Well, the way I remember them, they were real good, but they were just ordinary
Probably a lot
food.
of beans and cornbread.
Yes,
And good
We had
substantial.
beef. We always had beef.
Naturally, you would
Yes.
have. And probably some pork too.
Well, I don't seem to remember about the pork, but I'm sure we had bacon.
Grace, I didn't live quite back that far, but sorghum syrup seemed to have
Yes,
been
we had syrup.
It was a substantial part of the meal.
Yes, it was. And we had a lot of hot biscuits. I can remember those.
We don't have biscuits like that much anymore.
I can remember one of my uncles telling me that if we didn't have enough syrup, we could put a little sugar on our biscuits.
That's right. I've had buttered biscuits with sugar on it.
I don't know about the butter. I can't remember that.
You don't remember what you had, where you had butter? You probably did. You might have had some milk cows or something.
Well, I can't remember that either.
Do you know, from hearing them talk, do you know about how many miles a day you'd travel?
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
How about the time? You left in June? And
We left in June, and we arrived in Matador, near Matador's, where we camped, where we could keep the cattle.
Had water and so forth.
Yeah, near the water. And I think it was long in the fall, perhaps in October.
October. So it was about 4 months on the
Yes.
long ways there.
Yes,
And I guess you followed streams along and stayed close to water.
Yes, we did, and they had to dip the cattle at a certain place.
The quarantine was still
Yes,
in
and they had to rope them and dip them, and with sacks and brooms and that sort of thing.
That's quite a job.
I know my father was quite a cowboy. He could pretty handy with the rope, and they said he'd sit on his horse all day and rope the cattle.
And I guess that was when you came into certain country.
Yes, a certain place. Now, I don't know just where that was.
Cattle had to be dipped so that you wouldn't bring a disease in.
Yes,
So, Then did you come the next spring to Hansford
Next
County?
spring, we arrived in Hansford County in May, the first part of May.
That'd been in 1902 then.
Yes,
And where did you settle? Do you remember?
Well, yes, my uncle had filed on 4 sections of land, and that is the land where the Rosenbaums live. And they had been up here earlier and built a little shack on that place. We called it the Saddle House, but it was a little maybe a 10 by 12 shack, and that was on the land, and it was on the east side of the canyon where the Rosenbaums live.
And is that still there, or
the house that they built for us to live in is still there.
Still there.
The Rosenbaums moved it over on the other side of the canyon.
And
but
that's
it's still there.
South of Old Hansford.
Yes, about a mile and a half south.
I guess you still have a lot of fond memories going on.
Oh, yes, I do. We lived there until 1913.
1913.
And then we bought the Gus Ward place. And that is the place south and west of Old Hansford. As you go down the hill, you can see that place there. There's a windmill there and kind of an old house there that's nearly all gone. But at the time we moved there, it was a nice place, well improved.
Grace, most of us our age know what half dugouts are, but for the younger people, did you have many half dugouts in the country?
Yes, there were a number of them.
And describe them. They were. What is?
Well, most of the half dugouts would dig down in the ground to a certain depth, and then they would build a top on it, very similar to a house, only it wasn't near as high.
But the ground underneath.
Most of them had dirt floors.
And that wasn't thought anything of. You just
just glad to have a place to live until we could do better.
Right.
We never lived in a dugout, however. We stayed in a tent till our house was built.
I've often, that was something else too, because if you had strong winds, and I suppose they had winds.
We were in this canyon, and protected more or less from the north wind.
Now, about the country itself, did we have any trees other than...
No, there wasn't any trees, only those along the creek.
Did that make it seem lonely to you out here? Or do you
Well, of course, I don't remember that, But I did enjoy the creek. We went over there for picnics and that sort of thing.
Did we have wild plums in those days?
Not here, in this area very much. There was some down the creek, but not any up the creek.
What kind of fruit did you have?
The only fruit we had was wild grapes and wild plums.
So you had to go plum hunting?
We went down on the river to get the plums.
Quite a few grapes in those days?
Yes, there was grapes on the Paladura.
And where was the nearest place for supplies, like grapes?
Well, that was Hansford. Old Hansford was established.
It was established at that time.
Yes. There was 2 stores there, and courthouse was there, you see, and there was a post office and a barber shop.
Now, I don't think in all of our visits with all the people we've covered things as extensively as you probably have in this research that you have. For example, the buffalo hunters. You did a lot of research on that, and that was way back in the 1870s.
Yes.
The buffalo hunters. Where did they come from?
Well, it was the first 2 that settled in the county was Bob and James H. Cater, and they came from England originally.
Is that right?
Yes.
And that family is still here?
Well, some of the families are still here.
Yes, some of their descendants.
The original family, most of them are gone.
And did they come purposely for...
Well, no, they came to Kansas. Their father was a sea captain, and he sent his sons to Kansas to farm. And when they arrived in Kansas, why, they stayed there a little while, but they decided that wasn't a thing they wanted to do.
They wanted some of the venture.
They had a venturesome spirit, and so they didn't stay in Kansas more than a year, I don't think. And then they came to be, well, they first went to Colorado, and they didn't stay there very long, and then they came to the Panhandle and decided to be buffalo hunters. That time, people were hunting buffalo.
It was pretty lucrative.
And they were killing them, you know, and just selling the hides. That was the business.
Mm-hmm.
And they were good.
Now, I noticed on your research paper here that they were among those who went to Adobe Walls to help the white men.
Yes, they were here at that time, and they were hunting buffalo, but they were not down there at that time.
Now,
but they were several miles from there, but when they heard about it, why, they came to Adobe Walls and were there.
And helped in the battle then?
No, they came after the battle was over.
Well.
But they had to leave their hides and their wagons and so forth, and
to come down.
To come. They felt, in order to be safe, they had to find a place to. So they came to the fort.
And I suppose were their hides and everything?
Yes,
all
they
right?
were. The Indians took them. You know.
Took them?
Yes. Yes, they did.
This was, I think, the Adobe Walls, historically, was the last major battle between the white men and the Indians.
Yes, I think so.
And actually, the Indians had already been put on the reservation, but these Indians had come off the reservation.
Yes, yes. And this fort had been started there to take care of the buffalo hunters, you know, in order to provide them with supplies.
And protection.
And they brought their hides there and sold them, you know. They were shipped to Dodge City, yes.
Now, you have in here, they built the Zulu Stockade.
Well, this was after the buffalo hunting was over. You see, after this ceased, why, then they built the Zulu Stockade, and it was located on the Paladura Creek, it was the first building north of the Canadian River and was used as a stagecoach stand from Dodge City, and it was called the Tascosa Trail.
And it was built from logs hauled
from Moore's Creek. That is the tributary of the Canadian River. And Bob Cater named the place Zulu.
Wonder how he got such a name.
Well, it was named for an English war in progress at this time, and was being and at the time this
building was being constructed.
Yes.
And it also became the first post office north of the Canadian River.
Yes, it did.
Where was that location?
Well, it was. It's on the. The place is still there, and it is south and a little west, perhaps, of the Jim Cater place. Do you know where that is?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, it's 5 or 6 miles north of Morse, between Groover and Morse.
It'd be interesting to go over there and see it. Now,
yes.
Is the building still there?
Yes, the Cater home is still there. The house is still there, and but of course this
stockade
was torn down.
You have a picture of it, though.
Yes,
I have Jones had it.
Yes,
had it in her book.
Yes. That place is very familiar to me because my father carried the mail from Hansford to Old Zulu.
Tell us about that.
And we went up there 3 times a week.
Did he carry it in a buggy or a horse?
Yes, buggy.
And you went with him?
And we children. My father was a crippled man, and he couldn't walk for 12 years before he died.
Well.
But he had this mail contract for this stage line from Hansford to Zulu, and we carried the mail in a buggy.
And was that enough room for it?
Yes. You see, we had a big leather sack for the letters, and then we had a great big sack made out of just bed ticking for the papers and magazines and things of that sort. And we would tie it on the back of the buggy.
How long would it take you to make the trip?
Well, we would leave at 9 o'clock and arrive there at 12.
3 hours, is that?
It's about 16 miles.
You had a pretty good team then.
No, we didn't. We drove one horse to the buggy.
And it must have been a pretty good horse.
He was. He was good horse. Well, sometimes we used a team, but more often this horse, one horse.
So I guess you look forward to the mail trips then.
Yes, we enjoyed
snowing.
it. However, it was cold in the winter.
Yeah, sure.
And we had, my dad had a foot warmer, and he had
What was it?
it was just a little case about so large, and we burned charcoal.
Well, now that's something.
And that kept his feet warm, and we had what we called a storm front for the buggy. We used it when it was real cold, and it fit over the front of the buggy and protected us from the wind.
Feet and so forth. And you don't see any buggies anymore unless you're in a museum somewhere.
No. He used those big buggies, strong buggies, Spalding buggies. It
And
was
they had
a big, strong buggy.
spring seats, and
Yes.
they were on springs too.
Yes.
Easy riding.
Well, as easy as it could be called.
How about the road? Was there a road?
Well, there was a road up the creek. We went right up the creek.
And the horse knew the way very well.
Oh, yes.
Didn't
But
it?
we had so many gates. That was the trouble.
So that was why the children went on the road.
We had to go to open the gates.
But I bet you enjoyed it at that.
Well, I did, and we knew all the people.
Grace, did you? Were there any buffaloes here when you came?
No.
Just never have been any buffaloes. I saw 2 buffaloes last Thursday, somewhere between Childress and Wellington. Some farmer down there had them in a pasture, and that's the only 2 buffaloes I know of anywhere within 200 or 300
They
miles.
used to have some up at Tex Line, near Tex Line up there. They had some.
Yes, I remember that. On over just across the line into New Mexico.
New Mexico.
There may still be some there, but
I don't think so. I haven't seen any when we would be going to Colorado. We didn't see any.
and so the buffaloes almost became extinct, I think, but for a few scattered places. But when you get up north now into North Dakota and South Dakota, and in the Badlands of South Dakota, there's a big ranch there that has hundreds of buffalo.
Well,
And they're
so
kind
there's
of a
still
tourist
there's
attraction.
still buffaloes in the country.
Yes, but you don't remember seeing any here.
No.
What about the weather? And did we
Well-
have worse winters than we have?
Well, we had occasionally we did. Now in 1903, after my folks came, we had that bad snowstorm. They said it was 3 feet on the level, you know, and so many of the cattle
They lost them.
lost them, and my folks did. So many of our cattle died, and my uncle and aunt that were with us become discouraged, and they left and went back to South Texas. But my mother and father stayed on.
And all these years, many people had lots of hard times and ups
Yes.
and downs
We had to do most everything, most anything we could find to do for a living.
for a living. And people helped each other.
Yes.
Now, what were some of the things that you could do for a living?
Well, my father taught school the first winter he was here for 3 months, I think. And the school was in the courthouse at Old
Now, this
Hansford.
is very unusual because most of the time you had a school marm. This is
Yes.
very unusual. He must have been the only male teacher in the
Well,
whole Panhandle.
Mr. Wright taught school at M.B. Wright taught school at one time.
Is
He
that
had a
right?
private school at Old Hansford.
And your dad taught school there.
Yes.
Now, when did you start to school? Do you recall?
Well, let's see. I probably started when I was 6 or 7 years old.
And people, even back in those kind of times, felt that education was a very important
Oh,
thing.
yes, they did. There was a schoolhouse in Old Hansford, but the doctor was living in it. They had to have a place for the doctor to live, so he lived in the schoolhouse, and they had the school in the courthouse.
Who was the doctor?
His name was Moore, Dr. Moore, when we came.
And it was important enough to have a doctor that he took over the
He
school.
took over the school and lived
And
in
then
it.
you had the school and the courthouse.
Yes.
Describe the courthouse at that time.
Well, the courthouse was a pretty nice building. It was they had a big courtroom, and then they had the sheriff's office and the clerk's office and the treasurer's office, and they had a big lobby. That is a hallway, we called it, and there was a full basement underneath.
And it was, I believe, a brick building. Wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was. It was a big building.
Cassie Richardson had the records on that.
Here's a picture of it there.
It is a nice building.
Uh-huh.
Very nice. And the windmill out there, of course.
Yes, I thought.
And she had the price that
was cost.
I think it was.
It says here in the courthouse. The court ordered that bonds in the amount of $12,000 be issued for the purpose of building a courthouse and jail.
And there, all that beautiful building was built for $12,000.
Well, the bonds were sold to the State Board of Education, and a contract was left, and from some contractors from Kansas City, for $13,132. This being the lowest bid. The building was to be in native stone, you see. But when the contractors came, they couldn't find enough stone, so they had to vote bonds for $6,000 more, and it was to be built of brick. And they started to build it, and it was blown away twice before they finished it.
My goodness.
They were going to have a 3-story building first, and they finally decided that they would have to have just the one story.
One story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was it blown away by strong winds or tornadoes?
Tornadoes. We had 2 tornadoes, and it blew the people away too, the houses and places that lived in Hansford at that time.
Many people lose their lives?
No, I don't think there was anybody lost.
They were able to find cover.
Yes. Some of them were blown away. The Wright family was. I remember them talking about, the girls talking about, just picked them up and they had to hunt for them and find them and just blew them away.
And they still live through it?
Yes.
That's something. That's really something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wanted to get back over here. You had a notation here of the first women in Hansford County.
Well, all right.
How did they get along with that women when they came?
Well, now this, let's see, where is it?
It may have been on this first page.
Might have been on the first page, was it?
It must have been, I don't know, but I saw a caption there, the first women.
First. Well, it's a little further over, I think.
This is a magnificent piece of work that you've done. Here it is.
Yes, all right. The first women came in the fall of 1879. Captain Cater sent his daughter Clara and her younger brother Bert, and Jenny Ledlow was a friend of Clara's, and they came to the Panhandle from England. In time, both girls fitted into the life in the Zulu Stockade, tending to the store and the post office, assisting the postmaster Bob. In 1882, Jenny and Bob Cater were married. Soon after this, James H. made a trip to England and met Edith Land, who was the daughter of a physician and was to become Jim Cater's wife. He returned to the Panhandle and intended to go back to England for her. But as soon as he could build her a home. In 1883, James Cater began constructing the rock home, which still stands, and this was the first home in the county.
First home?
Uh-huh.
Other than half dugouts and tents and so forth.
And there wasn't too many of those at that time, you see. This was back in 1883.
There weren't many people here, were there?
No. It was constructed of natural rock from the Paladura area. It was near where they built the home.
That's north of here, then?
No, it's west. It's up the creek.
Up the creek?
Up the Paladura Creek. Uh-huh. It's west and a little south.
Northeast, it's located 1 mile northeast of Zulu.
Yes.
Higher ground.
Yes.
Because they evidently had some trouble with floods in those days.
Yes, the creek got up, and came down, even at that time. And after the severe winter of 1886, now they had a severe winter in 1886, and they didn't have another one until 1903.
They come in about cycles of about 20 years, then.
Yes.
18 to 20 years.
Uh-huh. It said almost all the Cater herd was exterminated.
Because of the snow.
They didn't have the fodder to feed them, you see. Due to this fact,
Bob became discouraged, it said.
Yes, and he sold out his interest to James.
And moved to Oregon.
Yes,
Which was more wild, I guess, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I'm sure it was. And in the meantime, Jim had intended to go back to England and marry Edith, but he couldn't do that. He couldn't leave his cattle, and so she came.
She came here.
She came here.
That's pioneering spirit, isn't it?
Yes, it was. She and her brother came.
And she
His
had no
name was
idea.
Land. And they came to Dodge City, and Mr. Cater and his friends, Mr. Wright, Mr. J.H. Wright and Mill Wright, went up there, and they had the wedding.
And then she came on here.
Yes, they
And
came
this
on.
is more glamorous than they paint it in the picture shows these days.
I think it was, too. Now, this was in 1887, you see. That was pretty early.
Now, she came
That
on
was
here.
before the county was organized.
Yes,
Mhm.
And very few people here.
Yes,
Still
very
Indians
few.
roaming around.
Yes, very few.
And probably some buffalo still.
Yes, I'm sure there were, but not many.
And did they live here then from then on?
Yes, Miss Cater lived in that place all the rest of her life.
And she had some
Children. There was 3 children, 2 girls and a boy.
And are they around now?
Now the oldest daughter is still alive, and she lives with her daughter or son. I don't know which it is, and I believe they live in Perryton.
In Perryton.
Mhm.
Well, that's wonderful. It'd be nice if we could visit with her.
Yes, it would.
She'd have a lot of things to tell.
I haven't seen her in a long time. I don't know just what her health is like or about her, but Jim and the boy, Jim and his sister Louie, she was Mrs. Gid Noble. You've heard of the Gid Nobles.
Yes.
They have gone on. They've passed away.
I believe that Sid Noble is still living, is he not?
Gid.
And
It's Gid, G-I-D.
Gid. And he is supposed to be our guest here on this same
Oh,
program.
he is. Well, it'll be interesting to have
Surely
him.
will. Now, you have a notation here, the creation of the county of Hansford County.
Yes.
It's first surveyed in 1876.
By Mr. Cole. And before this time, there was no county. It was only a territory. The county was formed from Young and Bear County territories. It was created August the 21st, 1876, but was not organized until March the 11th, 1889.
Now, I think it'd be interesting to note the spelling of Bayer because...
Well, it's B-E-X-A-R.
Yes, there is a Bayer County now near, San Antonio is in
Yes.
Bayer County. And so many people who come here from other parts of the country, and radio announcers I catch, you can tell a new radio announcer in this country, radio announcer that's new in this country because he'll talk, invariably there'll be a story about San Antonio and he'll talk about Bexar County.
Yes.
But it's Bayer. And this was not from that county, was it, here?
Well, I don't know. It seems like that would be a long way, but I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you.
But it was created from those 2 territories.
Yes.
Bear and, the Bear territories, it says.
Yeah.
Young and Bear territories.
Young and Bear.
And all government affairs were handled in Mobeetie.
Yes.
Which is
If they came out and filed on the land, they had to go to Mobeetie.
to make a record of it.
Right. Yes.
And that's
That was
75 miles or 100 away from here.
in Wheeler County, across the river.
And the old fort there still stands. That has
Yes.
a lot of historic value, too.
Yes, it does.
Now, the first towns.
Well, the first town was in 1880, and that was called Farwell. And it was started by a family from Illinois named, I don't know whether that's Canott or not. It's spelled C-A-N-O-T-T.
Uh-huh.
And the post office for Farwell was established in September of 87 and was discontinued in August of 94 when it was moved to Hansford. And during this period, there were 4 different postmistresses. in this post office.
And Hansford was established in 1885. So this county is 74 and 15.
But it wasn't organized until 89.
89.
4 years later.
But it was established in 1885.
By J.H. Wright, better known as Huff Wright. He came to this area as a young man from near Kansas City. The post office was established in 1887. The first postmaster was James McGee.
Is that family still here?
No, they wasn't here very long. I didn't know them.
Now then, the town was moved to Spearman in
1919, really.
And
Fall of 1919.
And then the post office
came in 1920. It stayed over to Old Hansford until they had a building for it.
All through these interviews we have established why it was moved here, but let's do it again because that'll save somebody some time in research that are playing these tapes. It was moved here because it came to the railroad.
Yes.
Which is about 4 miles away.
Yes.
How did they move the house?
It's 6 miles away.
6 miles.
Yes. Well, they had a man came here that was in that business. He had a big engine and all of the equipment to move the places with, the houses with.
Did they put them on wheels? Or?
Yes, they put them on big logs, and they were on wheels and pulled by this big engine.
And didn't take him too long to move.
No, not too long.
A couple of days, probably.
Yes.
He probably was
He had to find a way to get up the canyon, out of the canyon, but they did. They found a hill that wasn't around up through the canyon, that wasn't so tall and
steep.
They could make it.
And he must have been several months moving the town there.
Well, it started along in September or October, and most of the buildings were here in August of the next year.
Grace, you have some rich lore to share with us about the Dust Bowl days, and particularly because PA was so involved in trying to help keep the farmers on the land at that time. And we want to talk about that in just a minute, right after this message from Baker and Taylor. This morning is Grace Lyon, and we're just recounting some of the old days. Grace moved here in 1902. Started in 1901 and came in a covered wagon, and it took over a year, I guess, didn't it, Grace, and all?
Almost. May. We arrived in May and we left in June.
So about 11 months. Now, P.A. Lyon, Grace's husband, deceased, was in the Federal Land Bank, among other things. He did so many things. He was an abstract man and, of course, had the Lyon Insurance Agency, and still the agency exists, but during the Dust Bowl days, I think I've heard so many people praise PA for encouraging them and helping them to stay on the land. And you have just a brief entry here. It says 1930, the Dust Bowl days started and tried men's souls. And I think that's saying an awful lot in one short sentence there. Tell us about, for posterity's sake, some of the things that went on. Because wheat, I know, in Perryton became famous nationally because the farmers hauled their wheat to town, and the price was less than 25 cents a bushel, and they dumped it on Main Street instead of selling it. And they were so discouraged. You remember that?
Well, we didn't have any wheat.
In here, huh?
No, we didn't. You see, there wasn't any crops. The fields just blew away.
And what caused that?
Well, it was because we didn't have any rain, and we had wind.
And we didn't know as much about...
they didn't know how to take care of the land.
And it just blew away.
Just blew away.
And you couldn't raise anything.
No.
And houses were half covered with dirt or sand.
Well, we had to put tapes on the windows and did all that sort of thing to try to keep them out of the house.
And
keep the dust out of the houses.
It is impossible to keep it all out.
Yes, it was.
Fence rows, I've seen fences you could walk over.
Yes.
because of the dirt piled up.
Yes, and sometimes you could scarcely see to travel on the roads. The dust would be so bad.
Now, did people actually go hungry?
No.
Now,
so far as I know, nobody went hungry.
The Depression days, as you say, tried men's souls, the dust, and there was just no way. It looked impossible, and there didn't look like any tomorrow in the farming industry.
No.
But yet we didn't have crime. I don't remember crime like we
have. Well, people knew that it would come back. We'd have a good year. They felt that in their hearts, those that stayed.
I want to get a point in here, Grace, because of your nature. You're a fine Christian woman, and you've always lived close to the church. And what's happening to us? People now won't work. We have more jobs than we have people, and money is plentiful. It's no trouble to get money, and yet we have crime, and we're deteriorating. Or am I being gloomy about this? Can you give me some encouragement about this?
Well, I don't know. We have more crime in our area because we have different people coming in here. We don't have the type of people we had.
Don't have the pioneer stock.
No.
Well,
we still have them. We don't.
Yes, but
we don't have crime
others
from them. It's those that come in.
How about the other parts of the country?
But I don't. It's all over the country. I don't understand why it is, but
it worries me considerably because all nations, in the history of all nations, when they start to deteriorate in their spiritual life and their home life, I think the home is the seat of it. The nation soon crumbles, and we may be near that. We just may be near that.
Yes. We don't like to think about it, but we're...
Sometimes we stick our heads in the sand.
Yes, we try to think that God is still in heaven.
Well, I think so.
And
I don't think that's any question, but he may slap our wrist pretty soon.
Yeah, that we may suffer, but I think that eventually it'll be better.
That's encouragement. That's encouragement. Now, back to the Dust Bowl days. I had to get this in here, Grace, because I've known you for all the time. We've been in Spearman and knew the type of person you are, and it's so encouraging to hear you say that. How about many farmers pulled up and left, and what happened to the land? Did anybody take it, or?
They rented it. Different ones did. However, it was there was legislation, for some of it, you know, they
after
call
1933.
Yes,
And that's when Roosevelt came into power.
While until Roosevelt came into power, why, they just had to leave it, they just let it blow away. And it's surprising to see you could go from here to Dalhart and it just break your heart.
There was nothing growing.
No, there wasn't anything growing. And the dust was piled up on the fence rows and against the buildings where there were buildings. There just wasn't anything growing.
Were people able to water enough from windmills?
Some had yes, that's where we got our water.
And, of course, you had some...
Some had some cattle, There was some stock.
Near the streams. And
well, near where they had windmills to water them.
Uh-huh. And I guess people raised nearly everything they ate in those days.
Well...
except their staples like flour and sugar.
Yes, that sort of thing. They had gardens, I'm sure.
Tell us about the society, the social life. I remember ice cream suppers and 42 parties and that sort of thing.
Well, that was the thing that we had. We had, of course, we lived in Spearman, and we had more or less activities here in Spearman. We had our church, and our preacher didn't get paid very well, but he stayed with it anyway.
How about the preachers in those days? Did they have poundings and that sort of thing?
Yes, we always pound the preacher when he came, when he first came, We always did that. And
for the benefit of people who might not know, what is a pounding?
Well, you'd take we'd have a meeting at the church, and everybody would bring something.
Canned goods.
Canned goods and sugar and anything that
was edible.
Edible. Mm-hmm.
And tried to get a month's supply at least for the
Oh,
preacher.
yes, sometimes it'd be more than that, you know, because everybody would bring something.
Or quite a bit of something.
Yes, uh-huh.
And
yes. And it was quite a social get-together. And it was when the preacher first came, and they'd all get to meet he and his family. And
had a lot of purposes, right?
yes, uh-huh.
It was and it pulled people closer together.
Yeah, yes, it did.
Now, Grace, how about the price of beans in those days? They seem to be about the highest thing you can buy now. What do you remember the price of beans?
I couldn't tell you, but I know we ate them.
They were very cheap.
Well, I'm sure they were. I know we could always get beans.
Do you recall about what it took in the early 30s to subsist on what could a family live on comfortably in dollars and cents? $60 a month?
I think so. I think you could.
And that
yes.
would pay house rent and utilities and buy groceries and what clothes you had to have.
Well, I don't know. We never rented a house, so I just can't tell you about that. But I'm sure that's the way they lived. I'm sure they did. Of course, we always, Perrin had a salary, you see, and we didn't suffer like some people did because we had this salary. He had this federal farm loan he got, and then he worked for Mr. Berkeley and Mr. Collard but that was before the Dust Bowl days. He bought the abstract office in 29.
And then the crash came.
Yes.
And that he paid for it with the inflated money, and
yes.
I mean he bought it with inflated money.
Well, we had some land, and we traded our land for it. That's how we got it.
And then there was lots of business, but nobody could pay for it.
No, we had to carry them.
And this probably went on.
And the salary from the federal farm loan came in always.
And that helped.
Yes, it did. Mm-hmm.
He was the one that talked them out of not giving up their farm. Because the Federal Land Bank was not taking farms away from them.
No, they were not. If they wanted to stay, they wanted them to stay.
And they'd just extend their loan. And
yes.
the payments and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And then by 1933 it began to get a little better.
Well, yes. Yes, it
there was
some
a little
better.
help from the federal government.
Yes,
And then...
Of course, that was after the bank.
Now, you have a notation here. We'll skip the Dust Bowl days for a minute. The Second World War.
Yes.
In December of 1941, the Second World War was declared, and the sons of the First World War veterans were called into service to serve their country. And there were several who did not return.
Yes.
And during the war years, the first gas wells were drilled in the northern and western part of the county.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes, they were all in the north and west part of the county.
I didn't know they were that soon, is what I meant.
Oh, yes. All during the war, they were drilling.
And didn't have oil, though, until in the 50s, did they?
No, they didn't really discover oil first. They had the gas.
And then you said that Spearman didn't boom until 1953, when oil production became extensive.
Yes.
And the oil and gas industry has brought many people to Spearman, and for the first time, Spearman has had an industrial payroll.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first hospital opened in August 1947.
Mm-hmm.
B.J. Garrett donated a city
No,
block.
it was Garnett.
Garnett?
Okay. That was Wesley's father.
And
he donated a city block for the hospital. And I believe I told who the first patient was, wasn't I? W.A. Schubert, that's Fendar's father, was the first patient. And the first surgical patient was A.R. Stetson. And the first baby born was Karen Ann Wint.
Is she still here?
I don't know whether she is or not. I didn't know the Wint family.
The first hospital directors were W.R. Griever, Everett Vanderberg, Orville Walker, Howard Brillhart, F.J. Hoskins, H.L. Wilbanks, and is that Josie?
Cater Hayes.
Mm-hmm. In 1961, a new modern hospital was completed and was designated a county hospital.
Yes.
That's the one we have now.
Yes.
And continues to serve us real well.
It surely does.
Grace, we're about out of time. Is there anything that you would like to say on this tape before we...
Well, I've enjoyed the visit we've had. There's a lot of things I'd like to talk about, but you just can't get everything in.
If you'd like to come back, we will. If you'll make notations on, we'll have another session. Would you like to do that?
Yes, I would.
Fine. We'll set you up after we get off the air for another time, and then you make the notations of things you'd like to
I'll do that.
talk of, and
I wanted to talk about how beautiful the creek was. It had large alfalfa fields and that sort of thing is the thing that I like. People don't realize that.
Pretty animals that were on it.
Yes, and it was quite an interesting period of time.
It's been very wonderful to visit with you this morning. Our guest has been Grace Lyon, and we'll have her back for another session before we close out these tapes that we're doing for the hospital, for the library here. Tomorrow we have another old-timer that's going to be very interesting, and we're very anxious to visit with him. That's Knox Pipkin. And Grace, you know Knox
yes,
very well.
I know him.
And we hope you'll be listening tomorrow. Today's guest, as we told you, Mrs. P.A. Lyon, Sr. Our program was brought to you today by Baker & Taylor Drilling Company, and they join us in wishing you a very, very fine day.